Welcome to the Lockton Energy and Power Podcast. Today we have CEO and co-founder Andrew Willis of Kona Energy. We're going to explore Kona's business and what it takes to expand an energy business internationally. Hi, Andy. Welcome to Lockton's podcast. Great to have you in the building here today. So Kona have obviously built an impressive pipeline here in the UK, and you're now looking beyond UK shores into the US. What's prompted the move to another territory?
Yeah, thank you, Rufus. Yeah, so as a brief overview, Kona, we've got a pipeline in the UK, mainly transmission connected batteries, 200 to 300 megawatts in scale and 2 to 4 hours in duration. We have a pipeline that we're focused on delivering in the UK, but it is a very constrained and busy market, really. We know there's a lot of development activity, a lot of people holding grid connections, and fundamentally, there is a kind of capacity limit in terms of what you can build in the UK. And so as a business, we have made the strategic decision to look at other markets, and in particular, the ERCOT market. So looking at the Texas power grid over in the United States. One of the reasons for that is that it's fundamentally quite a similar market to the UK, insofar as there's a high penetration of renewables on the grid. Even though Texas is historically a kind of big oil and gas state, they have rolled out renewables at a rate of knots, so a huge amount of solar and onshore wind. Interestingly, Texas is also an island grid. So unlike most of the other systems in the US, it isn't interconnected with other states. And so it has a lot of kind of similar characteristics to the UK in the fact it's an island grid, high penetration of renewables. And so you start to get big volatility issues on the grid, which energy storage can help to manage.
Yeah, that's all really interesting stuff, Andy. I mean, how have you found the initial sort of break into the US, and how is it what's the differentiation between the US and the UK in terms of policy and regulation?
So I guess to start off from a market's perspective, in the UK, we have a single wholesale price across whether you're in northern Scotland or down in Cornwall. You get paid the same amounts for delivering energy in the wholesale market, sorry. In the US, and in particular Texas and the ERCOT market, they actually have a nodal system there. So it's a locational price, and they have thousands of nodes across the whole of the network. And so siting your assets is very important when doing your due diligence into that market, because location is key to determining your revenues, especially for energy storage. So that is probably the big difference compared to the UK. Obviously, in the UK, we did actually consider locational market pricing as a possible kind of market reform in the last couple of years, but that was ultimately overruled due to potential impacts on investor confidence. So that's probably the main difference from a market's perspective. In terms of other kind of development features, there's pros and cons of each market, I'd say. In Texas, it's a very pro-business, fast-moving environment. And so what we have found is when you are looking to develop your sites, which often starts with a landowner, you find a piece of land you want to build your asset on, having those conversations with those landowners is a slightly quicker process than you have in the UK. Fundamentally, there's a lot more land there available, but there is a more kind of deals-focused market out there. And so you can move very quickly.
I think fascinating, really, because on the face of it, two quite similar markets, similar sort of Euro North American markets, but once you burrow down into them, they're fundamentally very different. And you went a little bit into the positioning of your assets and the profitability that the batteries will output once they're live. How does that all work in the US then? Do you have a team on the ground looking for sites? Are you trying to co-locate near data centers? What's the sort of roadmap from your side of things?
Yeah, so in terms of where the early batteries have been built in Texas at the moment, often it's closest to the big demand centers. So you've got big cities like Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth. And if you can position at a node in close proximity to those demand centers, often they're the points on the grid where there's most volatility in price, especially in the evening when demand spikes. People, turn on the TVs, they have the air conditioning running, and so a lot of the early batteries that have been developed out there have been developed in those demand locations. What we are actually more focused on at the moment is developing our projects out in central West Texas. And that is predominantly where most of the renewables are. So a lot of solar, a lot more land, and a lot of kind of onshore wind out in the west of Texas and also the Panhandle. And what we're seeing and what our kind of thesis is there is that you are getting very low energy prices in the day. So when it's say 2, 3 p.m. On a sunny day in Texas, in those locations, the price can often fall to zero or kind of $1 a megawatt hour for that electricity. And then when the sun goes in later in the evening and demand spikes, you are seeing very big kind of spreads emerge, which energy storage can help take advantage of and help kind of solve those issues for the grid by balancing those renewables. And interestingly, our kind of learning from the UK is that fundamentally that has a lot of similarities to Scotland, where we have a huge amount of wind resource up in Scotland, but actually the demand isn't there. We've got Edinburgh, Glasgow, but most of the demand centres are further down south. And so you have this position where high renewables in the north, all the power is getting flown kind of down to London and the other demand centres.
Yeah, it's the kind of crux of the issue at the moment with renewables, with storage as transmission. The US is slightly further ahead in terms of transmission, but obviously a little bit constrained as well. Are you looking at the sort of PPA side of things or data center BIOS or anything like that?
Yeah, so we are communicating with some data centers, and in Texas, that is a booming market at the moment. Obviously, with AI growth internationally, everyone is looking at data centers and looking to develop and construct data centers globally. But Texas, as a market where you can get relatively quick interconnection, a lot of the big tech companies are looking to build projects out there. And I think the latest kind of stats that emerged were there were 400 gigawatts of data center applications in the queue out there, which is, considering peak demand on that grid is about 85 gigawatts. It's absolutely enormous, 5 times what the grid can handle. We know all of those projects won't turn up. It will probably be kind of 10% of that or so. But even if you get 30, 40 gigawatts out there, that's a monumental amount of energy that is needed. And so that does kind of bring opportunities for developers such as ourselves and also renewables developers, because you need a huge amount of additional energy, additional power, and you need that as quickly as possible. And so batteries, solar, onshore wind can be built in relatively quick times, especially when compared to gas generators or gas power stations. And so we are actively speaking to some data center developers where we're developing projects about looking to kind of co-locate our systems with their developments as well, in order to give them either a quicker interconnection or a cheaper and more efficient interconnection as well.
Yeah. Those are all fascinating points. I want to sort of steer the conversation slightly towards construction and obviously some of the risks that come into play with projects of your scale, with renewable projects that are clearly in the US, and we have the risks around severe weather, which is obviously only increasing. How have you found the sort of Lockton team? Clearly on your project here in the UK, but we have operations in the US. What's the join up there been like?
Yeah, well, we've had an excellent experience of Lockton in the UK. So we're developing a large scale project up in Scotland and pushing that towards full FID kind of stage at the moment. I think with kind of appointing insurance advisors in our space, developers can often leave it too late, and you really get into the meat of your development, and then insurance can be a bit of occasionally a kind of a bit of a side thought. And I think for us, engaging Lockton early was a very positive experience, because it really made us realize the value and the importance of getting insurers involved early in the process. And especially before you start making decisions on design, choice of suppliers and everything like that, you need to know that these suppliers are bankable and the insurance market are going to be happy with them. So in the UK, for example, that was looking at particular battery suppliers, particular transformer suppliers, getting a view from Lockton on terms of the risk associated with those companies, some of the intricacies in terms of travel and where that equipment is coming from and getting a view on that. And that was all incredibly useful for our UK projects. In the US, we're at a slightly earlier stage where we're still in the development cycle. And so you do need to consider the same perspective as the UK, and you need to ensure, you're designing your projects properly from an early standpoint. You're taking on board kind of advice on fire safety, separation between containers and everything like that. But I'd say we do have a bit more work to do before we're closer to construction and late stage development, before bringing in Lockton for those conversations.
Yeah, fundamentally, I mean, we stand ready. We've got, I think that's one of the beauties of this business. We've got, strong presence in both locations, same sort of expertise, sort of same friendly face. And, obviously hope to do a good job for you there too.
Yeah. And I think whether you're developing in the UK or the US or Texas, there's often a lot of similarities in how these projects get developed, but there's also a huge amount of differences as well. And you mentioned there, Rufus, at the start, the extreme weather events. That's something we're increasingly getting in the UK, but we're not as impacted by. But places like Texas, it is far more common to have really severe summer temperatures, and also things like hurricanes, especially in southern Texas. Near to the water. And so you do need to start considering these additional risks, which, we need good insurers to help us out on.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fascinating what's happening with the co-location of a lot of these data centers and renewable projects, and actually power generation in its entirety in the US, because we're looking at really quite a lot of value in single locations that are subject to extreme weather events. And clearly time will tell what happens with El Nino, for example, this year, and what's going to happen as the climate gains more energy and so on. So I think from an insurance standing, it's very important to make sure that you're covered in those locations, because when things go wrong, they go really wrong.
And we've seen it in not for our projects, but examples in the solar world where you are developing kind of massive projects out in Texas, which might span hundreds of acres. And in severe kind of extreme weather events, such as major hailstorms or, close to hurricane events, a lot of those panels are getting severely damaged. And so, you need that insurance to have factored in that risk early and ensure you've got a plan to deal with it.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That's great. I think want to bring the conversation slightly into the operational side. So, clearly Smeaton's sort of still in the pipeline, but we can discuss sort of power markets and payouts and other bits and cash flow modeling. Where does the US and the UK differentiate in this? And how does that affect your investors, your investor confidence, and obviously divestiture as time comes?
So I think in both markets, you want a quality supply chain that's underpinning you. So both on the battery side, in terms of where you're getting those batteries from, are those tier one credible counterparties? Do they have long-term warranties that they'll stand behind, as well as just generally good performance and evidence of that as well? So that's kind of crucial on the battery side. And in the UK, we predominantly use the Chinese battery supply chain. That is the global hub of where these lithium batteries are produced. That is a similar story in the US, but they do have a different tariff regime now, and they are increasingly onshoring their domestic battery manufacturing. And so for developers, that is pointing you towards actually considering diversification of the battery supply chain. On the balance of plant side, or the EPC side, you are contracting with the entity that is actually delivering the site for you. So the companies that will be doing the civil engineering, that will be installing the batteries, that will be connecting you to the electricity network at the end of it. Those are often really the critical parties in both the UK and the US, and you need counterparties that understand the grid, that they understand the compliance process, how to actually get your battery installed at the end of it and online and operational, because that can catch out a lot of developers. Especially, if in the UK for Kona's projects, we develop purely at transmission. And compared to distribution, that fundamentally is more complicated. And so you need a counterparty there that has that experience, that's delivered projects, that has been through that process with those various network companies. I think on the revenue side of things, again, it's one of these cases which is similar but different. In the UK, we've seen the market move towards structures whereby floors and tolling structures on the route to market side are really driving investment into projects now. And most equity investors, but also crucially your debt investors, want to basically see a guaranteed level of revenue. And you can get that in terms of a floor contract or a toll as well, which might smooth or guarantee a certain level of revenue over a 10 to 15 year period, which can then be used to bring in debt finance to these projects.
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating time for battery storage energy trading. I mean, long are the days of crazy revenues post the invasion of Ukraine. Do you see an ever decoupling from gas pricing setting the sort of certainly in the UK, setting the price?
Yes, yeah, increasingly. And it's only a good thing for the UK energy system. I think politically, there's always been um, a desire to move away from gas setting the price. And, we have been reliant on foreign countries for our gas supply. And you see with events like Ukraine, like with the Straits of Hormuz crisis recently, that being dependent on international sources is fundamentally risky, and you are at the mercy of what's happening internationally. And so the more renewables we can build and the more storage to help balance that, we are reducing our dependence on those fossil fuels and ultimately setting the price in these wholesale markets as well. So we are seeing that increasingly in the UK during the summer months, when there's lots of solar on the grid, lots of wind, demand is a bit lower. Renewables are increasingly setting the price rather than expensive gas-fired power stations. Interestingly, it's similar in Texas, and they've probably moved quicker than the UK. And again, that is driven by a huge solar boom. And in the middle of the day, out in West Texas, for example, as I said, prices do drop very, very low when there's high solar penetration on the grid. Demand is generally quite low because everyone's at work. It's the middle of the day, and you do see those prices falling to $1-2 a megawatt hour.
Yeah, I think. Just going back slightly to one of your points around, various projects. If you took 200 megawatts of BESS in the UK and 200 megawatts of BESS in, out of Texas somewhere, on the face of it, both grid connected, they pose their own unique risks and challenges to getting them to FID, to getting them to construction, to getting them obviously onto operations. I just wonder, we don't have a looking glass, what the next sort of 5 years looks like for Kona in terms of construction development and clearly operations. And, looking back, what might be the lessons learned, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So in the UK, we have a pipeline of projects. We have been going through grid connection reform. And so for Kona and pretty much every other developer in the UK, we're getting to a point where you need to back your most advanced and your high quality projects, and projects where you might have gate one connection offers potentially in some cases will be deprioritized. And so you need to kind of work out, okay, what are we going to do with those projects? But with our leading projects, we do want to deliver those. So we are always considering different investment options to do that, whether that's into Kona's top company or JVing with equity sponsors to come in and build those projects in the UK. It's a very similar story in the US as well. We pride ourselves on being independent and being able to move very quickly and can make very quick decisions. But at the end of the day, whether it's a 200 megawatt project in the UK or Texas, there's a really big capital requirement for these projects. You often need debt, whatever happens, but also a supportive equity sponsor that shares your vision for where you're developing on the grid and how you're delivering those projects. And so we will be looking to engage with those markets to build out our pipeline, both in the UK and Texas going forward.
Awesome. Yeah, fascinating time really for Kona, for yourself. Looking sort of beyond Texas, have you highlighted any other markets of interest to Kona internationally or anything else?
Yeah, it's always such an interesting question because I think what's happening globally is the fundamentals are very good for renewables and energy storage. And so, we see solar is the cheapest and the quickest way of developing power generation in pretty much every country now. So globally, that is happening at a rate of knots. And as we said, you need a lot of energy storage to back that up, both for energy reasons, but also ancillary service reasons as well, ensuring frequency remains stable on the grid, voltage stays stable, and everything like that as well. And so to some extent, the world is your oyster in terms of there is going to be energy storage growth globally. And your job as the developer is to pick the correct markets and where there might be the quickest growth, the biggest opportunity. So we are always kind of considering other markets, both in Europe and the US. We haven't looked further afield at the moment. And you are kind of weighing up what's happening in the market fundamentals. What is the need for energy storage fundamentally? What is the local policy position? That often comes down to the view on grid connections as well. Globally, there is a rush on grid connections, and in some markets, you might be waiting, 10 years to get connected to the grid, which from a development perspective, you are naturally going to deprioritize that market. So it's very much a kind of multifaceted approach, but you need good fundamentals, high renewables growth, good market fundamentals, and a environment where you can develop and build quite quickly.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Andy, but I've just got myself an EV and kind of join the crowd or whatever. And it is like stepping a little bit into the future. If this new platform plugs into the house, don't have to go anywhere near a petrol station anymore. Don't spend 70 quid to charge it at night, really low rate. It's a really interesting future when you look at electrification and the batteries in cars and the demand and the sort of cycle from individual batteries in house, particularly connected to rooftop solar. What do you see as the sort of role of grid scale batteries in a future that's fully electrified?
Yeah, another good question. And just coming back to your EV point there, Rufus, is that kind of vehicle to grid enabled as well? Do you know if you can provide power back to the
grid? I can, but not. I'd have to put in the sort of charging infrastructure on my side, which I think is like £5,000 or something. So in essence, I was a bit of a cheapskate and went for the one way, but maybe in time I might.
And that's probably an issue which will be resolved over time. At the moment, it's expensive to have that vehicle to grid, and for the distribution network operators down at those lower voltages, even though on the one side it's very helpful for them to get that energy and for them to kind of manage their grids through electric vehicles, it can be a bit of a shock to them because they don't have the data to know where energy is coming in, where it's going. And so as risk averse companies that need to keep their lights on, they can take a very kind of cautious approach to how they manage that. Generally, though, I think it's, we should be, whether you're in the grid scale battery storage market or you own an EV or anywhere in between, everyone should be championing that. And the more competition, the better really across these markets. I do think in the UK or any market really, these large transmission connected assets are in effect power stations, like they would have been traditionally back in the day. And so they will have big roles on shifting huge amounts of energy when the grid needs it. So storing it in the day when it's cheap, providing it during peak demand times of the day, for example, during that evening peak in the winter, which electrification at the lower voltage end, at the kind of local domestic house level or an EV, it helps and it can help those individual customers, but it's slightly more difficult to scale up.
Yeah, I think those are all fascinating points, and ultimately we don't have a looking glass into this all. But the overarching point there is that storage isn't going to go away. It's increasing exponentially right in front of our eyes, and it's a really interesting time to be in your position, in our position, ensuring it obviously, and we really look forward to the future of it all.
Yeah, absolutely, Rufus, and it's incredible. Just the boom in EVs in the last 5 years. The range you can get out of these vehicles is phenomenal. And, you'll notice that just from turning your TV on and looking at the next advert from BYD or Tesla or whoever it is. And it just shows that the technology is just coming on in leaps and bounds. And it's not going to stay still. It's only going to improve. And that is only going to encourage that transition to electric vehicles. But of course, in our industry as well, it's very good for us because it means more dense batteries, more efficient batteries that last for a longer period of time. And that's only going to have benefits for the power system at the end of this as well.
Yeah, I think, from an insurer standing, obviously Lockton being brokers, from an insurer standing, there was sort of some concern around fires in batteries or thermal runaway or whatever you want to call it. But, what we've seen more recently is a real softening of the market, i.e. rates coming down, more insurers wanting to write batteries, and prices for developers, obviously on the insurance end, coming down as well. And those are all lessons that have been learnt through through big claims, through better risk management, and through really encompassing batteries as an asset class of its own in the energy mix. And yeah, I think Kona are in a great place looking forward.
Yeah, and I think the whole industry has really benefited from, that massive pool of data that the insurance market has at the end of the day. There are a few well publicized cases of fires in these grid scale batteries, but thankfully it's very kind of few and far between now, and the industry is very good at learning those lessons, then incorporating it into physical sites, ensuring you are building the right chemistries, you've got the right separation, you've got the right kind of fire safety processes in place in the very unlikely event you do have a fire. And that kind of is why the insurance market is softening, which is good for developers globally.
Yeah. And, just to sort of add to that, and I hope you do work with us, in the US and beyond those borders. We have our whole in-house engineers. We have a whole in-house claims function. So, really we like to do cradle to grave with our clients, really working with them right from the outset and into divestiture or wherever the assets end up going.
Yeah. And I think a learning from the UK is to get involved with the insurance market as soon as possible. And there's risks that you don't factor in as a developer, even on the construction side, the operation side, or potentially much earlier. It might be a land issue, for example. And just taking an anecdote, in Texas, you might negotiate an option or a lease or to buy the land where you're going to build your battery, but you may not have considered what's under that ground and who has the rights to, in effect, the oil and gas that's underneath that.
Yeah.
And you need to know that from an early standpoint. And you should be doing your due diligence, but the insurance market can also really help out there if there is a kind of unforeseen issue. And yeah, that is an area where I'd encourage developers to start very early on in the process.
Yeah. So just from your perspective, and to sort of summarize, Andy, what are your sort of three main takeaways, particularly around the insurance, but more in terms of risk and development going forward?
I'd say engage early is definitely rule number one. We've had a great experience with Lockton, and in terms of just getting that expert buy-in from your experts on the engineering side, on the technical side, on the actual product side, the battery side is invaluable from an early standpoint, and that will help to drive your procurement decisions and ultimately your investment decisions as well. In terms of other lessons learned, I think you have to think about everything in the round as a developer. So you can't just think about the land or the planning or the grid connection as individual points. Everything is holistic and it fits together. And so that is going to drive your choices in development and choice of market as well.
Yeah, well, we're really looking forward to the next sort of chapter of Kona in the next 5 years, hoping to work with you throughout your development cycles and advise wherever you may go internationally. Really great to chat to you today, Andy, and thanks for coming in.
Brilliant. No, thank you, Rufus. And thank you for all your support over the last year. And we look forward to working with Lockton in both the US and other markets that we're looking into as well.
Thanks, Andy. Great to have you.